Hello, RVCC Online. It is good to be back with you after being away for a month. And one practice we do as a church that I love is that we share this task of preaching because we believe God speaks through a variety of people and not just the campus pastors. So I hope it was a blessing for you to hear God's word from Sarah Goodell, Dave Hutka, and Mike Parejo this summer. I've appreciated their perspective and heart when it comes to topics such as trauma, loss, and depression, and we are better as a community because of them and the conversations they've started around mental health. Also, selfishly, I'm grateful because not preaching has given me time to make our move from Maple Valley to Puyallup. And as of last month, Jill and I have completed our fifth move out of 7 years. And if you heard me correctly, you heard me correctly there, because from California to New Jersey to Washington, Graham to Kent, Kent to Maple Valley, and now Maple Valley to Puyallup. I can't count. I missed something in that, but I won't lie. One of the biggest challenges in moving for me so frequently is not just trying to figure out what do we take and what do we give away, but it's also meeting new people and creating new meaningful friendships. And yeah, I know it's weird for a guy whose primary job is to be in front of people, but I'm an extreme introvert and I literally have to prepare myself for social interactions hours in advance. But one thing that's been helpful are the invitations to lunch, dinner, and coffee many of you have extended to Jill and me over the last year. And I can tell you that before every meeting, I was super nervous, was on the verge of canceling, but by the end of every meal, I walked away feeling known, blessed, and felt a deeper connection to the people I was with. Why? Well, not just because we broke bread together, not just because we spent time together, but also because every person I was with was willing to share their story, what they've been through, what they hope for, and where they have seen God's goodness at work in their lives. Storytelling has that sort of power. Stories move us, connect us to other people, help us to empathize, inspire us to act, and can even shape the way we see the world around us. That's why storytelling is one of the oldest and most universally practiced arts in every culture and continues to evolve with the times, from cave paintings then to Instagram stories now. When we want to make ourselves known, when we want to share what is important about us, when we want to convince others of what we find most compelling and true, when we are trying to unite communities, we don't make a list of points, facts, or even reasons and then share it over a campfire. No, we share our stories. And here at RVCC, we believe that not only does everyone have a story to tell, but that it's important to tell it. In fact, we consider sharing your story one of the 7 basic discipleship rhythms we want everyone who calls Rainier View home to practice. Why? Because storytelling is one of the main ways people have shared the good news of who God is from the very start. When questioned by their children about why they lived the way they did, the Israelites responded not with a list of facts, but they said, because we were slaves of Pharaoh. But the Lord brought us out of Egypt with a mighty hand. In other words, they responded with a story. Likewise, when Babylon took Israel into exile, the Israelites preserved their identity by writing down and sharing memories of God's faithfulness. When Israel returned from exile, they continued to tell stories of God's presence in Babylon so that future generations would live with the hope that God wasn't finished with his people yet. And when God became flesh, died, and rose again, saving the world from sin and death, guess what the response was of the first witnesses? You already know what I'm going to say. They told stories. In all these examples, sharing who God is involves a personal story of how God acted, moved, blessed, saved, and redeemed. Now, I don't know about you, but when I think about sharing with someone the good news of what God has done in Jesus, aka sharing the gospel with someone, my mind goes straight to Bible facts, systematic theologies, correct doctrine, and even some great books or videos or podcasts you should read or listen to on that topic. But very rarely, if ever, do I think about my own personal story. But it's interesting to note that even the Apostle Paul, the guy who is most responsible for spelling out the early doctrine and theology of the church, doesn't share the gospel by just presenting the facts. When on trial before King Agrippa, facing the possibility of death and called upon to give an account of who Jesus is, Paul doesn't respond by saying, well, Jesus of Nazareth is the incarnate Logos, internally the hypostatic Son within the immanent Trinity, and within history, the Christ who fulfills the messianic expectations of the Hebrew Scriptures and inaugurates the eschatological age. I mean, he could have, and he wouldn't have been wrong, but it would have answered the question, but it wouldn't have connected with King Agrippa or anyone, and that statement probably doesn't connect with you either. So Paul does something better, though. He doesn't just share who Jesus is, theologically speaking, but what Jesus has meant to him. I think this is because Paul understands that people won't care about the content of your faith until they connect with your story first. So Paul doesn't say all that crazy stuff. What Paul says is he shares how he was a Jew and a Pharisee who was passionate about faithfulness to God, and who was willing to kill anyone to prove how devoted he was. But then he meets Jesus on the way to Damascus. And then Paul says this, "One day, I was on such a mission to Damascus, armed with the authority and commission of the leading priests. But about noon, Your Majesty, I was on the road, a light from heaven, brighter than the sun, shone down on me and my companions. We all fell, and I heard a voice saying to me in Aramaic, 'Saul, Saul, why are you persecuting me? It is useless for you to fight against my will.' And I replied, 'Who are you, Lord?' I asked, and the Lord responded, 'I am Jesus, the one you are persecuting. Now get up on your feet, for I have appeared to you to appoint you as my servant and witness. Tell people that you have seen me, and tell them that I will show you in the future, what I will show you in the future, and I will rescue you from both your own people and the Gentiles. Yes, I am sending you to the Gentiles to open their eyes so they may turn from darkness to light and from the power of Satan to God. Then they will receive forgiveness for their sins and be given a place among God's people who are set apart by faith in me.'" For Paul, what was important for King Agrippa to hear was not just that Jesus was Lord, not just that Jesus forgives sins and rescues people from the power of darkness, not just that Jesus inaugurates the eschatological age, but also that Jesus did a work in him. Jesus rescued Paul. Jesus forgave Paul. Jesus gave new life and new purpose to Paul. And what Paul wanted King Agrippa and anyone else who was listening to his story to know was that Jesus wanted to do the same work in them. Paul shared his story every chance he got, and the result was that people found hope, encouragement, inspiration, healing, and even started following Jesus because God used Paul's story to make himself known. But have you ever wondered, what if Paul never shared his story? What if Paul decided to keep his faith to himself? What would be the consequences then? Well, don't get me wrong. I still think the gospel would have reached the ends of the earth, but I do think the world would have missed out on the unique ways God was working through Paul. And as weird and as off as it may sound, what if the same is true about us? We all have a story about what God has done in our lives. We all have a purpose for which God has called us to. And I also think that something would be lost in the world if we never shared our story. Now, you might be thinking, well, Joe, my story isn't all that interesting. Nobody would want to hear about what I have to say. Paul was a trilingual genius who wrote 1/4 of the New Testament, but me? Come on. Do you really think the world would be missing out if I didn't share my story? But let me tell you something. If that's your thinking, if that's your reasoning, then you aren't just underestimating yourself. You are also underestimating what God can do through you. Think about it this way. Paul had no idea when he shared his story with Agrippa that this doctor named Luke would write it down in Greek. He had no idea that 1,000 years later, it would get translated in English. And 2,000 years later, a bunch of people who lived on a continent he never even knew existed would hear the story and think to themselves, if Jesus pursued a murderer and changed his heart, maybe it's not so crazy that Jesus will pursue me and change me. The point is this, you don't know. You don't know what purpose God has for your story. So invite someone to dinner. Go out for coffee. See what God does. Maybe in your family, there's someone who needs to hear it. Maybe one of your neighbors needs to hear it. Maybe someone at work or school is waiting to hear it. Maybe 50 years from now, someone will play a hologram of your story in 8K resolution and it will cause a revival at a Pac 4 school. I don't know. But what I do know is this: if you have truly tasted and seen the goodness of Jesus, you have a story to share. And God will be faithful to do the unthinkable with it. And all you and I need to do is to be faithful to tell it. And speaking of storytelling, today Laura Lind, who has been a member at RVCC Graham, has courageously offered to share her story with the entire church. And I want to thank you, Laura, for being vulnerable enough to talk about your struggle with fibro and how you have seen God's goodness amid it. May this story bless you all, increase your faith, and inspire you to share yours today. Share your story today. So God bless.
I'm Laura Lind. My husband and I started attending RVCC back when Stall Campus first opened. And then we left shortly after we moved to Nelson Elementary. And when we felt the Lord was calling us to a different location for a season, and then we came back, and hopefully we're here forever now. Following Jesus is difficult for me to say. I was raised in a Christian family. So I went to Christian private school, kindergarten through 12th grade. The first time I said repentance prayer is I was 5 years old at our church. The next time I said it, I was 8 at Awana Camp. And then about every year thereafter, I rededicated my life to the Lord. I really struggled with doubt, knowing if Christ really loved me, if I was worthy of Christ's love. That was really difficult for me because I didn't feel like I was a Christian. I worried about my Christianity. And when I say worried, I mean I felt like it was I didn't want to go to hell, right? I knew that I wanted to go to heaven. I didn't want to go to hell. And it was more of an insurance that I was going to get there. And that's kind of how I looked at my Christianity. And I knew Jesus was there, right? And I know that I'm going to go to hell if I don't have a relationship with Jesus, but the relationship part was missing. So when I think about following Christ, I think about following Christ probably into my early 30s was when I started following Christ. I've struggled all of my life with depression and anxiety, obviously not as a baby, but when I was, I would say early teens, on meds early in life, had social anxiety, didn't realize that that's what it was social anxiety. Just really knew that I didn't want to be around a lot of people. I just didn't have that. I didn't have the good feelings that my friends had when they were around all their friends. Had trauma in my life, and had to do a series of changes about in my 40s, or actually about in my late 30s. And all those changes I developed fibromyalgia. You're actually born with fibromyalgia if you have it, but it's one chemical difference. It's dormant until you actually have a traumatic experience in your life, and that's when it comes out. So after the trauma in my life, my fibromyalgia came out, and really struggled with it. It wasn't as bad as it is right now, but I felt bad at the time. And so I started seeing a doctor who had a treatment that she was using that would help with anxiety and depression, and then in result with the fibromyalgia. And it really worked well. It really worked well for me until it didn't. And during the time when it worked well, I was doing a job that was a managerial type job in the school system, special ed teacher, and kids mean a lot to me, and I tend to push myself. And unfortunately, I started thinking that I got this, right? I can do this. I can push, and I can do. And even though people in my life were telling me to slow down, I kept saying, no, I got this. I can do this. And the problem was that I kept saying, I can do it. And it's not about me. It was about God. And I was putting me before God. And my depression and anxiety spiked. Fibromyalgia spiked. It was shortly after my mom was diagnosed with Alzheimer's. And my doctor and my counselor both said, you know what, I think we need to look at the treatment again. They wanted me to totally be off work because memory was also an issue. I was seeing it more and more prevalent as far as like remembering people's names, remembering what I had done yesterday on the job, those kinds of things. And so my doctor, my counselor really wanted me off work so I wasn't dealing with the stress while trying to treat the depression and anxiety. Really had a hard time with that because my students are my students and I really care about them, and to be off for 10 weeks during treatment, that was really hard for me. I had to really make a decision, and I was really feeling like I don't want to take the time off. I want to be there for my kids, and my support system was telling me, no, you need this time off. And so that was really hard for me. It was hard for me because I wasn't relying on God. I was relying on my own power. So I was on my way to, I was 2 weeks into my treatment, and I was on my way to meet my in-laws. And I'm listening to Caleb on my radio, and I'm really having a hard time. There's decisions that I have to make. My doctor and my counselor want me to change jobs, and that's huge for me because I love my kids. And really feeling lost at what I should do. So I was listening to the radio on my way to meet my in-laws, listening to Caleb, and the lady on the radio on the other end says, God's going to show you his plan for your life today. And I just turned off the car and I went, what did she say? And I owned it. I owned that God was going to show me how he wants me to go in my life, right? What direction is he going to lead me in? And I finished with my in-laws, and I walked around the store that we were in, and I found a book, and it was pretty. It was white. It had pink on it, flowers. I loved it. And when I got up closer, it said, what happens when women say yes to Jesus? And what happens when women have faith in Jesus? And I picked it up. I didn't look at it. I liked the title. I liked the cover. I just put it in my basket. Stayed on my counter for 3 days. That Friday that happened, nothing miraculous happened. You know, I didn't all of a sudden hear chimes saying, oh, this is what you're going to do for the rest of your life. I was kind of hoping that's what it was going to be. But on Sunday night, I opened up the book I had bought, and all of the areas that I struggled with doubt, and I struggled with questions that I've had that I didn't know how to ask, but they were in my heart. She started opening up. The writer just started answering all those questions. And as I dug into the Word, I started seeing the answers right there in God's Word that I had never known were there. I didn't know where to look. And I was raised reading the Bible my whole life. I just didn't know where it was. So the next Sunday, we were at church, and we had started the service, God Gets Us. And it just really hit me because it made me realize that I'm not going through anything that Jesus didn't go through. He had anxiety. He didn't sin in his anxiety. He didn't try to handle it on his own. He turned to God. And I've been trying to handle it on my own. Treatment's going well. I'm seeing some progress. It's not done. But by being in the Word and being able to rely on God. I'm learning how to rely on God. I'm not perfect, but I am learning to take deep breaths, and instead of focusing on something worldly, I'm focusing on God, that He's going to walk me through whatever anxiety, depressive moment I'm in. He's going to walk me through it. First service that Jeff led, that was part of our series, God Gets Us. At the very end, he had said, well, if you are interested in baptism, if you want to pray, if you want more information, I'm going to be in the back. And at first I thought, well, I don't really need more information, right? But I felt so led to go talk to him, and really what I wanted was to be baptized. I'd already been baptized, but my life hadn't been following Christ. It hadn't exemplified what baptism is a symbol of. And I wanted my friends and my family to know that I've made this commitment. At this point, I had been in my devotion book that I had bought for a week, and I just felt like I needed the people around me to know I'm not the same Laura that I was before. And I'm not relying on myself. So I went and talked to Jeff and told him that I wanted to be baptized. And he said, yes, I'll write your name down and you can be baptized. And I love baptism. Baptism's so beautiful. But I'm really appreciative of this opportunity to be able to share with everybody my incomplete situation. To know that I love Jesus and I love God and I trust God, and that I'm going to continue to follow Him. And I have a community around me with my Bible study group who also supported me in making the decision to take the time off. And I want them to know and to be able to hold me accountable, because life's going to happen. I know that. I'm not young. I know that life's going to happen. And it's very possible that I might try to rely on my own strength again, and I need to have my community around me to be able to hold me accountable and remind me.